The radar screen flickered with an impossible signature. 300 miles offshore, something was moving through the storm at Mach 2.1, executing maneuvers that defied every known aircraft specification. The duty officer at Ramstein Air Base stared at the green blip, his coffee growing cold as he watched the contact perform a 90-degree turn at 6 GS, a maneuver that should have torn any pilot apart. "Sir, we've got an unidentified contact inbound," Sergeant Mills called across the operations center, his voice tight with confusion. "Flight profile doesn't match anything in our database." Colonel Marcus Hartwell pushed back from his desk, steel-gray eyes narrowing as he approached the radar console. 28 years of service had taught him to read between the lines of military bureaucracy, and today's training exercise had been classified far above his clearance level. Someone wasn't telling him everything. Range and bearing. Hartwell's voice carried the authority of a man who'd commanded fighter squadrons over 3 continents. 270 nautical miles, bearing 045. "Sir, it's coming fast. ETA 12 minutes at current speed." Mills paused, his finger hovering over the identification friend or foe interrogation button. "Should I scramble the alert fighters?" The colonel studied the erratic flight path. The contact had appeared suddenly, as if materializing from the storm itself. No flight plan had been filed. No diplomatic clearances existed for foreign aircraft in this sector. Yet something about the signature pattern seemed familiar, like a half-remembered melody. "Negative on the scramble," Hartwell decided. "Keep tracking, and get me General Morrison on the secure line." What Colonel Hartwell didn't know was that 40,000 feet above the churning North Sea, Captain Vera "Ghost" Kowalski was fighting for her life in an experimental F-16 XL that officially didn't exist. Her hands moved across the controls with surgical precision, compensating for systems failures that would have killed a lesser pilot. The storm had already claimed 2 escort aircraft, their debris scattered across 50 square miles of ocean. "Ramstein Control, this is Ghost 77. Her voice crackled through the static, professional despite the circumstances. "Requesting immediate emergency clearance and approach vectors. I have multiple system failures and am running on fumes." The radio operator nearly dropped his headset. Ghost 77 wasn't supposed to exist. According to every official record, that call sign had been retired 3 years ago after a training accident that had supposedly killed its pilot. Yet here was that voice, calm and steady, cutting through the interference like a blade through silk. Colonel Hartwell took the microphone with trembling fingers. He recognized that voice, had trained with its owner before politics and prejudice had grounded the best pilot he'd ever seen. "Ghost 77, this is Ramstein Actual. You're cleared for immediate approach. We're rolling the emergency equipment." Behind the professional facade, Vera Kowalski allowed herself one moment of relief. She was coming home. The thunderstorm parted around her aircraft like a curtain, revealing the distant lights of the airbase. Her fuel gauge read 0, but her engine continued its steady burn. Physics suggested she should have flamed out 50 miles ago, yet she flew on through sheer force of will and expertise that bordered on the supernatural. "Ramstein Tower, Ghost 77 on final approach. Gear down, full stop landing." Her voice remained steady despite the fact that her hydraulics had failed completely. She was flying a $20 million aircraft using nothing but manual reversion and 20 years of accumulated skill. The tower controller, Captain Rodriguez, had seen thousands of landings, but none like this. The F-16 XL descended through the storm like a falling star, its approach angle impossibly steep. "Ghost 77, you're coming in hot. Recommend go-around." "Negative tower. This is my only shot." Vera's hands danced across the controls, feeling every vibration of the airframe through her fingertips. The runway rushed up to meet her, rain-slicked and gleaming under the approach lights. Colonel Hartwell stood in the control tower, watching through binoculars as the mysterious aircraft touched down. The landing was textbook perfect despite the horrific conditions, a greaser that barely registered on the runway sensors. As the F-16 XL rolled out, he could see battle damage along the fuselage, scorch marks that told a story he wasn't cleared to hear. "Who is she?" Captain Rodriguez whispered. Hartwell lowered his binoculars slowly. "Someone who was supposed to be dead." He paused, memory flooding back. "The best damn pilot the Air Force ever threw away." Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft as it finally came to a stop. The canopy opened with a hydraulic hiss, and a figure in a pressure suit climbed out with practiced efficiency. Even at this distance, Hartwell could see the confident movements of a natural aviator, someone who belonged in the cockpit the way others belonged on solid ground. The figure removed her helmet, revealing short auburn hair and sharp features that had haunted more than one general's nightmares. Captain Vera Kowalski, call sign Ghost, had returned from the dead, and judging by the smoking wreckage of her aircraft, she'd brought hell itself as her wingman. Vera Kowalski stood beside her dying aircraft, rain streaming down her flight suit as she surveyed the damage. 3 years of exile hadn't dulled her edge. If anything, the classified missions had sharpened her skills to a razor's point. The F-16 XL behind her represented technology that wouldn't officially exist for another decade, and she'd just proven its worth under conditions that would have grounded conventional aircraft. "Ghost 77, this is Colonel Hartwell." His voice over the ground frequency carried weight she remembered from her early days as a lieutenant. "Welcome home." She keyed her radio with a gloved hand, her response carrying 3 years of suppressed anger and hard-won wisdom. "Ramstein Actual, Ghost 77, reporting mission complete." A pause, then softer. "Permission to come home, sir." The debrief would wait. Questions about her unauthorized flight, the experimental aircraft, and her supposed death would come later. For now, Colonel Hartwell simply watched as his best pilot walked across the tarmac, her shadow long against the runway lights. He'd spent 3 years believing the official story, accepting that Captain Kowalski had died in a training accident. The truth, as it often did in military circles, painted a more complex picture. "Rodriguez," he called to the tower controller, "classify everything you've seen tonight. No logs, no reports, no radio transcripts." "Sorry." "That's a direct order. As far as official records show, nothing happened here tonight." Hartwell's expression softened slightly. "But off the record, we just witnessed the return of a legend." The storm began to clear as emergency crews secured the aircraft. Vera Kowalski disappeared into the administrative building, beginning a debriefing process that would stretch through the night. Behind her, the F-16 XL sat cooling on the ramp, its exotic systems powered down but its message clear. The future of aerial warfare had just landed at Ramstein, piloted by a ghost who refused to stay dead. The official incident report would list the evening's events as routine weather monitoring flight with minor equipment malfunction. The truth would remain buried in classified files, accessible only to those with the highest clearances. But for those who witnessed Ghost 77's impossible landing, the memory would linger, a reminder that legends sometimes returned when they were needed most, emerging from storms both literal and metaphorical to remind the world that excellence, once achieved, never truly disappeared. 3 hours after touchdown, Vera sat in a sterile debriefing room, still wearing her flight suit. Across from her, Colonel Hartwell studied a file that had been classified above his pay grade until tonight. The Ghost program, officially terminated after budget cuts and political pressure, had actually continued in the shadows, testing pilots and aircraft beyond the limits of conventional warfare. "You were supposed to be dead," Hartwell said finally, his voice carrying equal parts accusation and admiration. Vera's smile held no warmth. "Death was the easy part, Colonel. The last 3 years, that's been the real challenge." She gestured toward the window where her aircraft sat under floodlights. "That machine represents everything they said was impossible. Tonight, I proved them wrong. The file between them contained performance data that read like science fiction. Sustained G-forces that should have caused blackouts, maneuvers that defied aerodynamic principles, and flight times that exceeded any known fuel capacity. Yet the evidence sat on the runway outside, cooling metal that had redefined the possible. "The brass wants you back," Hartwell continued. "Full reinstatement, promotion to major, and command of the new experimental squadron." "And what do you want, Colonel?" Hartwell closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "I want to know if you're still the pilot who could thread a needle at Mach 2, or if 3 years of classified missions have changed you into something else." Vera stood, her movements fluid despite the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. "There's only one way to find out, sir. Put me back in the air." Outside, the storm had passed, leaving stars visible through the clearing clouds. The morning would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities to prove that some pilots transcended the ordinary limitations of their profession. Ghost 77 was home, and the sky itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Dawn broke gray and cold over Ramstein, but Vera Kowalski had been awake for hours. She stood on the observation deck, watching ground crews prepare aircraft for the day's training missions. 3 years of classified operations had left their mark, new scars, harder edges, and a reputation that preceded her into every room. Yet seeing the familiar rhythm of military aviation stirred something she'd thought lost forever. "Early riser," Colonel Hartwell joined her at the railing, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Figured you might need this." She accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the steam. "Old habits. In my line of work, you learn to appreciate quiet moments." She gestured toward the flight line. "This used to be everything to me." "Used to be." Vera considered the question carefully. 3 years ago, I thought flying was about proving something, to my superiors, to myself, to everyone who said women couldn't handle high-performance aircraft." Her expression hardened. "Then they grounded me for political reasons, faked my death, and sent me places that don't appear on any map. The Ghost program." "The Ghost program." She sipped her coffee, watching an F-16 taxi toward the runway. "Turns out there are missions where being officially dead is an advantage. No family to notify, no records to maintain, no political fallout when things go sideways." Hartwell studied her profile. 3 years ago, Captain Kowalski had been talented but driven by personal ambition. The woman beside him now carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced the worst possible scenarios and emerged intact. "Any regrets?" "About which part?" "Getting shot down over Syria, spending 6 months in a Syrian prison, or crawling out of that wreckage to discover my own government had declared me KIA." Her laugh held no humor. "The only thing I regret is trusting the system to recognize merit over politics." A formation of F-22s launched from the parallel runway, their engines painting thunder across the morning sky. Vera watched them climb toward the clouds, her expression softening slightly. Despite everything that had happened, the sight of aircraft in flight still stirred something primal in her chest. "The new squadron needs someone who understands that this isn't about glory anymore," Hartwell said quietly. "It's about capabilities that exist beyond public knowledge, missions that never happened, and pilots who can operate in the gray spaces between war and peace." "Sounds familiar." "I'm offering you command, Vera. Full bird colonel, unlimited budget, and the best pilots we can find." He paused. "But I need to know you're doing it for the right reasons." She finished her coffee and set the cup aside. 3 years ago, I would have said yes immediately. Now," she turned to face him directly, "now I know that the real test isn't whether you can fly an impossible mission. It's whether you can come home afterward and remember why it mattered." Down on the flight line, her experimental F-16 XL sat under a camouflage tarp, its existence officially denied by 3 levels of classification. But Vera could feel its presence like a magnetic pull, calling her back to the element where she belonged. The briefing room fell silent as Vera entered, her new oak leaves gleaming on her collar. 12 pilots, the cream of the Air Force's crop, sat around a polished table, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. She'd requested this meeting specifically, wanting to address the elephant in the room before it became a problem. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned respect in the hardest possible ways. "I know what you're thinking. Dead pilot walks into a room, claims command of an experimental squadron, and expects you to follow her into situations that officially don't exist." Captain Jake "Viper" Morrison, a Top Gun graduate with 8 years of experience, leaned forward. "With respect, ma'am, some of us have been flying combat missions while you've been, wherever you've been. What makes you think you can walk back in and take command?" Vera smiled, recognizing the challenge for what it was, a test of her leadership rather than her flying ability. "Fair question, Captain. Let me ask you one in return. How many of you have logged combat hours in aircraft that don't officially exist, in countries we're not officially operating in, against threats that never make the evening news?" The room remained silent. She continued, "How many have had to explain to your families why you can't tell them where you've been for the last 18 months? How many have been declared dead by your own government and had to rebuild your identity from scratch?" She moved to the front of the room, her presence commanding without being aggressive. "I'm not here because I'm the best pilot in this room, though I am. I'm here because I understand the cost of the missions we're going to fly. When things go wrong, and they will go wrong, you'll need someone who's been there before." Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Phoenix Chen spoke up, her voice respectful but probing. "What can you tell us about the Ghost program?" "Nothing that's not already in your classified briefings. What I can tell you is that every pilot in this room was selected for specific reasons. You're not here because you're the best stick-and-rudder pilots the Air Force has. You're here because you can think beyond conventional tactics, operate without support, and make decisions that textbooks say are impossible." She gestured toward the window, where the experimental aircraft sat under heavy guard. "The F-16 XL is just the beginning. We're going to be testing platforms and tactics that won't see conventional service for a decade. Our success or failure will determine whether the United States maintains air superiority in conflicts that haven't started yet." The pilots exchanged glances, beginning to understand the magnitude of their assignment. This wasn't about conventional warfare. It was about preparing for threats that existed only in intelligence estimates and strategic planning documents. "Questions?" Vera asked. Captain Morrison raised his hand. "Ma'am, with respect, how do we know you're ready for this? 3 years is a long time to be out of conventional operations." Instead of answering verbally, Vera moved to the briefing screen and pulled up a tactical display. Yesterday's landing was conducted with complete hydraulic failure in a Category 3 thunderstorm, with 0 fuel remaining. The display showed her approach path, a line so precise it looked computer-generated. "I put 37,000 pounds of experimental aircraft on the center line within 3 feet of optimal touchdown point." The room was quiet as the implication sank in. Finally, Phoenix spoke. "Ma'am, I've seen the footage. That landing was impossible." "Exactly," Vera replied. "And in 6 months, when we're flying missions that don't officially exist, impossible is going to be our baseline operational standard." 6 weeks into the program, Vera stood beside the newest addition to their fleet, an aircraft that defied every conventional understanding of aerodynamics. The X-47C bore no resemblance to traditional fighters, its angular surfaces and exotic materials suggesting origins from classified research programs that push the boundaries of known technology. "It's beautiful," Phoenix murmured, running her hand along the aircraft's wing. "Like someone redesigned physics." Vera nodded, remembering her first encounter with truly advanced technology. The Ghost program had introduced her to aircraft that existed decades ahead of acknowledged science, machines that responded to thought as much as input. The learning curve is steep. This isn't about flying anymore. It's about merging with systems that can process information faster than human reflexes. The squadron had gelled faster than expected. Initial skepticism had given way to mutual respect as each pilot proved their worth in increasingly challenging scenarios. Viper had mastered low observable penetration techniques, while Phoenix had developed tactics for beyond visual range engagement that redefined air-to-air combat doctrine. Brief in 30 minutes, Vera announced. Today we're testing the collaborative engagement protocols. What she didn't mention was that today's exercise would be monitored by officials whose security clearances exceeded even her own. The success or failure of this demonstration would determine funding for the next phase of development and whether their squadron would continue to exist. As the pilots dispersed to prepare, Vera allowed herself a moment of reflection. 3 years ago, she'd been grounded for refusing to accept political limitations on her capabilities. Now, she commanded pilots and aircraft that represented the cutting edge of aerospace technology. The irony wasn't lost on her, but neither was the responsibility. Her secure phone buzzed, a message from Colonel Hartwell. VIPs arriving at 1400, make it count. She typed back, always do, sir. The afternoon briefing revealed the stakes. General Patricia Webb, the Air Force Chief of Staff, sat in the front row alongside officials from the Department of Defense and intelligence agencies whose existence was officially classified. This wasn't just a training exercise. It was an audition for the future of American air power. Ladies and gentlemen, Vera began, her voice steady despite the pressure. Today's demonstration will showcase collaborative engagement protocols using next-generation platforms. Our objective is to neutralize multiple high-value targets across a defended area using tactics that minimize exposure while maximizing effectiveness. General Webb leaned forward. Colonel Kowalski, these tactics are theoretical. How do we know they'll work in actual combat conditions? Vera's smile held the confidence of someone who tested theory against reality in places that didn't officially exist. Ma'am, everything we're showing you today has been validated under operational conditions. The only difference is that today's targets won't shoot back. The demonstration lasted 47 minutes. 4 aircraft operating as a single networked entity, sharing sensors and weapons systems in real time, eliminated 16 targets across 200 square miles of airspace, without a single defensive system achieving lock-on. The enemy never saw them coming and barely understood what hit them. As the aircraft returned to base, General Webb turned to Vera with an expression that mixed amazement and concern. Colonel, what you've shown us today changes everything. Yes, ma'am, that's the point. The implications for international stability are why this program exists, General. Our potential adversaries are developing similar capabilities. The question isn't whether this technology will be deployed, it's whether we'll deploy it first. The room fell silent as the weight of that statement settled over the assembled officials. They'd witnessed the future of warfare, and the future belonged to whoever could adapt fastest to technologies that blurred the line between science and magic. General Webb closed her briefing folder with deliberate precision. Colonel Kowalski, you have whatever resources you need. This program has the highest priority classification and unlimited budget authority. As the officials filed out, Vera remained behind, watching her pilots through the operations center window. They were celebrating their successful demonstration, unaware that they'd just changed the course of military history. In a few years, every air force in the world would be scrambling to develop similar capabilities. But today, the advantage belonged to 12 pilots who dared to redefine impossible. 2 months later, Vera received orders that she'd been expecting and dreading in equal measure. The envelope bore the seal of the Department of Defense and classification markings that restricted its contents to her eyes only. She read the mission briefing twice, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders. Operation Silent Thunder would be their first real-world deployment, a deep penetration strike against a facility that officially didn't exist in a country where American forces weren't operating. The target housed research into hypersonic delivery systems that could render traditional missile defense systems obsolete. According to intelligence estimates, hostile forces were 6 months away from operational deployment. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to her assembled squadron, "we have our first real mission." The briefing room's atmosphere shifted immediately. These pilots had trained for months, pushing themselves and their aircraft to limits that redefined possible. Now they would discover whether their preparation was adequate for the realities of combat in the shadows. The target is a hardened research facility in the Caucasus Mountains. Intelligence indicates advanced air defense systems, including technologies we haven't encountered before. Our window is 18 hours, enough time to penetrate, destroy the facility, and extract before local forces can respond effectively. Viper studied the tactical display. "Ma'am, the approach route takes us through some of the most heavily defended airspace in the world. How do we know our stealth systems will be effective?" Vera's expression grew grim. "We don't. That's why we're using 4 aircraft instead of 2, and why each of you has been cross-trained on multiple systems. Redundancy isn't just tactical, it's survival." Phoenix raised her hand. "Rules of engagement. Minimum necessary force to accomplish the mission. We're ghosts, we get in, eliminate the target and disappear before anyone knows we were there." Vera paused, studying each pilot's face. "But if things go wrong, if we're detected and engaged, you are authorized to use whatever force necessary to protect the mission and bring everyone home." The mission briefing continued for 3 hours, covering every detail from approach routes to extraction procedures. When it concluded, Vera dismissed the others but asked Viper to remain behind. Having second thoughts, she asked once they were alone. He shook his head. "Just want to make sure I understand the stakes, if we're detected, if this goes public." "Then we were never there and this conversation never happened." Her voice softened slightly. "Jake, I know what I'm asking. Every pilot in this squadron has families, careers, futures that could disappear if this operation is compromised. But the alternative, allowing hostile forces to deploy hypersonic systems, could cost thousands of American lives." He nodded slowly. "When do we launch?" "Tomorrow night. Weather window opens at 2100 hours. She paused. "Get some rest. And Jake, tell your wife you love her but don't tell her why." The next evening, 4 aircraft lifted off from Ramstein under cover of darkness, their departure logged as a routine training mission. They climbed to altitude over the North Sea, then turned east toward a destination that didn't appear on any official flight plan. Each pilot carried sealed orders to be opened only if the mission was compromised, containing instructions for actions that no military manual acknowledged. As they crossed into contested airspace, Vera felt the familiar calm that came with operational flying. The training was over. The theories had been tested. Now only results mattered, and failure wasn't an option that existed in her vocabulary. "Ghost flight, this is Ghost lead," she transmitted over the encrypted frequency. "We are crossing into enemy territory. Radio silence from this point forward unless absolutely necessary." 4 aircraft disappeared into the darkness, carrying with them the hopes and fears of a nation that would never acknowledge their sacrifice. The mountain peaks below resembled the surface of an alien world, jagged and forbidding in the pale moonlight. Vera's aircraft responded to her thoughts as much as her controls, its advanced systems interpreting her intentions and adjusting flight parameters accordingly. 40,000 feet below, the target facility nestled in a valley that had been carved from solid rock, by engineering techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. Ghost 2, I have eyes on target, Phoenix's voice whispered through the encrypted link. Thermal imaging confirms underground structures extending at least 3 levels below the surface. Vera studied her displays, watching as the networked sensors built a three-dimensional picture of the facility. The intelligence briefings had been accurate. This was a hardened installation designed to survive anything short of a direct nuclear strike. Conventional weapons would be useless. They would need to penetrate the facility and destroy it from within. Ghost 3, initiate electronic warfare sequence, she commanded. Viper's aircraft became invisible to conventional detection methods as its systems began a careful dance of deception and misdirection. The facility's defensive networks would register nothing more than atmospheric interference, never suspecting that death approached from above at 1,700 miles per hour. Defenses are neutralized, Viper reported. We have a 47-minute window before the next satellite pass. That was longer than they needed, but not by much. Vera initiated her own descent, feeling the aircraft respond with predatory grace. The X-47C wasn't just a machine. It was an extension of her will, amplifying her capabilities beyond anything previous generations of pilots could have imagined. Ghost 4, establish overwatch position, she ordered. Lieutenant Marcus, Reaper, Thompson acknowledged and climbed to maximum altitude, his aircraft's sensors becoming their early warning system against unexpected threats. His role was insurance, protection against the variables that could transform a surgical strike into a desperate fight for survival. The facility's outer perimeter passed beneath them like a miniature city, its structures connected by tunnels and passages that spoke of paranoid security measures. According to intelligence reports, over 300 personnel worked within the complex, most of them unaware of the true nature of their research. Scientists and engineers pursuing knowledge without understanding its ultimate application. Target confirmed, Phoenix transmitted. Central Research Building, Sublevel 3, that's where they're assembling the delivery systems. Vera felt the weight of command settle around her like familiar armor. In 30 seconds, she would make a decision that could prevent a war or start one, depending on how events unfolded. The hypersonic systems represented a shift in global power that could render American strategic advantages obsolete. Allowing their completion wasn't an option. Ghost flight weapons hot, initiate attack sequence. 4 aircraft dove toward the facility with synchronized precision, their approach angles calculated to maximize damage while minimizing collateral casualties. The weapons they carried weren't listed in any conventional arsenal, penetrating charges designed to collapse specific structures while leaving adjacent areas intact. The first explosions lit the valley like artificial daylight, followed by secondary detonations as the facility's own security systems turned against it. Within 90 seconds, the research complex had been reduced to rubble, its underground laboratories sealed beneath thousands of tons of rock. Mission complete, Vera announced. Ghost flight, execute extraction protocol. They climbed away from the target area as emergency vehicles raced toward the destruction, their presence nothing more than a whisper in the night. By the time local forces organized a search, the 4 aircraft would be hundreds of miles away, their passage through hostile airspace undetected and unacknowledged. The return flight passed in professional silence, each pilot focused on navigation and defensive measures. They had struck a blow against forces that threatened global stability, but the victory came with a cost that couldn't be measured in conventional terms. Somewhere in the burning ruins below, people had died, scientists and engineers whose only crime was working for the wrong government on the wrong project. As they crossed back into friendly airspace, Vera allowed herself to feel the weight of what they'd accomplished. The mission was a success by every measurable standard. The hypersonic program had been eliminated, the facility destroyed, and her squadron had returned intact. But success in their business always came with shadows that followed long after the official reports were filed. Ghost Flight, this is Ramstein Control. Welcome home. Home. The word carried different meanings now than it had 6 months earlier. Home was wherever her squadron operated, wherever her pilots needed her leadership, wherever the mission demanded their presence. The wars of the future would be fought by ghosts like them, soldiers who didn't officially exist, carrying out missions that never happened, protecting a world that would never know their names. As they approached Ramstein's runway, Vera felt a familiar satisfaction. They'd proven themselves under fire, validated years of training and development, and demonstrated capabilities that would reshape how conflicts were fought in the shadows between peace and war. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities to push the boundaries of what small groups of dedicated professionals could accomplish. But tonight, her pilots were coming home safe, and that was victory enough. The debriefing lasted 8 hours, with officials arriving from Washington, Langley, and facilities whose locations weren't discussed in polite company. Vera sat across from General Webb and a collection of intelligence officials, reviewing every aspect of the mission with surgical precision. The successful destruction of the hypersonic facility had prevented a shift in global military balance, but it had also created new challenges. Satellite imagery confirms total destruction of the target, General Webb reported. Local forces are reporting a geological incident, an underground gas explosion that caused structural collapse. No evidence of external attack. Admiral Sarah Chen, representing the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward. Colonel Kowalski, your squadron has proven the viability of next-generation tactical operations. However, the strategic implications of these capabilities require careful consideration. Vera understood the subtext. They'd created weapons too powerful for conventional command structures, tactics too advanced for traditional rules of engagement. The success of Operation Silent Thunder had elevated her squadron beyond normal military hierarchies into a realm where policy and strategy intersected with technologies that most officials couldn't comprehend. Ma'am, my pilots are soldiers. We follow orders and accomplish missions. The strategic implications are above our classification level. Not anymore, a new voice interrupted. Director James Morrison of an agency that officially didn't exist entered the conference room, his presence immediately shifting the dynamics. Colonel, your squadron now reports directly to a joint task force that operates outside conventional command structures. Your next missions will come from officials whose names you'll never know, targeting threats that haven't been publicly acknowledged. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a physical presence. Vera had crossed a line during Operation Silent Thunder, transitioning from military pilot to something closer to a strategic asset. Her squadron would become ghosts in the truest sense, existing in the spaces between official acknowledgement and operational necessity. Understood, sir. What are our next assignments? Director Morrison smiled, though the expression held no warmth. There's a research facility in North Korea that's developing artificial intelligence systems for autonomous weapons platforms. Their progress is 6 months ahead of our most optimistic intelligence estimates. Time frame: 2 weeks, and Colonel, this time you won't be going alone. The revelation that her squadron would be joined by international partners added complexity to an already challenging mission profile. Vera spent the following days briefing with pilots from allied nations, each bringing capabilities and perspectives that enhanced their collective effectiveness. The shadows where they operated had become a truly international domain. Flying had always been about transcending limitations, the boundaries of physics, the constraints of human reflexes, the restrictions of conventional thinking. But commanding the Ghost Squadron had taught Vera that the greatest limitations were often psychological. Her pilots had learned to operate beyond the normal boundaries of military doctrine, pushing themselves and their aircraft into realms where success depended on intuition as much as training. "Ma'am," Phoenix approached as Vera reviewed intelligence reports on the North Korean facility. "I've been thinking about the operational profile. The target is hardened against conventional attack, but their defensive systems haven't been updated to counter our capabilities. Your recommendation: single aircraft penetration, minimal signature, surgical strike, extraction before local forces can respond." Phoenix paused. "I'd like to volunteer for the mission." Vera studied her subordinate's expression, recognizing the same hunger for challenge that had driven her own career. "This isn't about proving yourself, Sarah. You've already done that." "No, ma'am. This is about proving what we can accomplish when politics and bureaucracy don't interfere with operational necessity." The truth of that statement resonated through every level of their organization. The Ghost Squadron existed because conventional forces operated within constraints that rendered them ineffective against certain categories of threat. When stealth and precision mattered more than overwhelming force, when success required capabilities that officially didn't exist, her pilots provided options that no other military unit could match. 2 weeks later, Phoenix's X-47C lifted off from a base that didn't appear on any map, carrying weapons that weren't listed in any inventory, targeting a facility that intelligence agencies pretended didn't exist. The mission succeeded with the same surgical precision that had become their hallmark. The target was eliminated, the pilot returned safely, and the world remained unaware that a significant threat to international stability had been neutralized. But for Vera, watching her pilot disappear into the darkness above the Sea of Japan, the moment carried deeper significance. 3 years earlier, she'd been grounded for challenging conventional wisdom about female pilots in combat roles. Now she commanded a squadron where gender, nationality, and conventional limitations had become irrelevant. Excellence was the only qualification that mattered, and results were the only metric that counted. Standing on the flight line as Phoenix's aircraft returned from its impossible mission, Vera reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The future belonged to those who could operate beyond conventional boundaries, who could think faster than their opponents, and who understood that the wars of tomorrow would be won by soldiers who didn't officially exist. The sky above remained infinite, filled with challenges that hadn't been imagined yet. And somewhere in that vastness, the next generation of threats was developing, waiting for pilots who could rise to meet them. 6 months after Phoenix's solo mission over North Korea, Vera stood before a gathering of the world's most elite military aviators. The annual Ghost Conference brought together pilots from allied nations who operated in the classified realms where conventional forces couldn't reach. This year's meeting was being held in a facility buried beneath the Nevada desert, its existence known only to those with clearances that transcended normal governmental boundaries. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, addressing pilots from 12 nations who collectively represented humanity's most advanced aerospace capabilities. 3 years ago, most of you didn't know my name. Today, the tactics and technologies we've developed have prevented 4 major conflicts and eliminated threats that could have destabilized entire regions. The audience listened with the focused attention of professionals who understood that their work existed in the spaces between acknowledged reality and operational necessity. Each pilot had been selected not just for their flying skills, but for their ability to operate independently, think beyond conventional parameters, and accept responsibility for actions that would never be officially recognized. The strategic landscape is evolving faster than traditional command structures can adapt, Vera.